We're talking about mental health today, but in this conversation, we're talking about it in the context of community. To do that, I'm here with Mexican-American poet and author Erika Sánchez and TikToker and activist Davie Felton. I've really enjoyed learning more about both of you. You're working in really different spaces, but from what I can see, you have at least two things in common. You are normalizing and destigmatizing the conversation about mental health in our culture in really important ways. And you're doing it in ways that inspire vulnerability and joy. And this is where I'd like to start. Could I ask you to describe the nature of your work and the communities that you're hoping to reach through that work? So Erika, we'll start with you. How did you get into writing and who are you aiming to reach through that writing?
Yeah, I got into writing at the age of 12 because I love to read and I wanted to be able to write the things that I couldn't say out loud and wrestle with all of these emotions and experiences that I had. And I felt like there was no one to really understand me. So the page was the place where I can express exactly what I wanted to express. And so my work speaks directly to the Mexican community, Mexican American, Latino community. It's work that, in many ways, transgresses the things that we hold very dear in our culture. Many of them, and it's work that I feel is really important in terms of mental health because Latinas suffer from mental illness at really high rates, and it's something that's kind of just invisible in our culture. And so that's who I aim to reach because that's what I needed when I was younger. That's still what I need right now.
You've talked about how important books were to you as a young person growing up in the 90s, finding your own voice. You were looking for voices, as you just said, who reflected more of your lived experience. And I want to fast forward to now, actually. We're in this time where we do have more representation, thankfully, in culture and in literature. Not enough, but more. And there's also more backlash. And not far from where I am here in Austin, Texas, in Llano County, officials are considering closing all of their public libraries rather
Oh my
than following a federal judge's order to reinstate banned books. And so I wonder how you, as a writer, as a Latina, as someone who found books to be the lifeline and that you needed,
God.
how do you receive news like that? How do you observe news like that? What's the response to this kind of trend in your writers community? And like, what's your take on that?
I mean, we're all horrified, honestly. It reeks of fascism. It is fascism. To control the knowledge that people have access to is wrong. And I I know that my novel has been banned throughout the country, and many different reasons have been cited, but ultimately, I think it's the fear of the other. It's because they don't want us to exist, especially in such a bold and public way. And so, yeah, I've been fighting the book bans in my own ways. I went to Utah to protest because they were banning books there, and I went to the state capitol, and it was just, yeah, it's tiring. It's like I just want to write books, and I want young people to have access to those books because I needed books when I was growing up. I survived because of books, because otherwise I feel like my life wouldn't have had much meaning because everything was so difficult, and books for me were this hope, this way out of where I was.
Stakes are so high. Davie, I'd like to talk more about your work with and for the queer community in Oregon, but also on TikTok and beyond. Can you talk a little bit more about how you got started there, what you're trying to accomplish, who you're trying to connect with?
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, my journey on TikTok started kind of as a product of the pandemic. I was working as an innkeeper at a bed and breakfast, that was shut down due to the fact that my owner no longer wanted to own a bed and breakfast in a pandemic. And as I was losing my job, I picked up TikTok out of sheer boredom. But then I found community, and TikTok has been as much a part of my personal journey as I am now a part of the advocacy for queer people on TikTok. That being said, I found representation there. I found people who thought and looked and acted and had views like mine on TikTok. I learned more about the diversity of gender expression. And I learned more and more that it was okay for me to truly be who I was. And I started presenting that way more and more on TikTok, and I found more community. It was amazing to find the reciprocation of people who were following me, also saying that their struggles, that their feelings, that what they were dealing with was very similar to what I was going through, and they were happy to see that representation. Now, as far as what I'm doing here in Central Oregon, I've just started a project to provide gender-affirming clothing to our queer neighbors for no cost or donation. It's called the Traveling Trans Trailer, and it is just getting up and going, and I'm very excited about the support that I've already received. We've got hundreds of pounds of clothing to go through already, and a great big trailer to haul it all around in. So I'm very excited about that.
I'm going to ask you about that, how it started and how it's going. So that's awesome. I want to talk a little bit more about social media. You're obviously, Davie, you've grown an incredible following. You've got, I think, more than 870,000 people following you on TikTok.
It's amazing.
It's quite an audience. But my question is, on social media, right? It's a double-edged sword. We've seen social media be a lifeline for oppressed groups to find community, to organize, and to hold power to account. I'm thinking about all the viral videos on police brutality is just one example. But we've also seen, social media companies perpetuate harm and polarization and misinformation, and it's, left us with this really uneasy relationship with social. Last year, Pew conducted a global study on attitudes around social media and found of all the 19 countries that they surveyed, the United States was the most likely to say that social media was bad for democracy. It's like we're having this real struggle. And I think both of you have pretty different approaches to social media, relationships with social media. And I'm just curious how you all navigate that tension as people who see social media as obviously a place to connect with communities in these spaces, but also as folks who are, by virtue of your identities, the kind of folks who are going to be more vulnerable to harm and harassment in those spaces. So, Davie, I'll start with you. What is your approach to navigating those tensions? Like, what has your experience been on TikTok? I think I read also recently you're not even on Facebook and Instagram anymore because they've shut. Like, talk to me about how you've been navigating all of this.
Yeah, unfortunately, at a protest, I caught the attention of some very bad actors, and they reported me falsely to Meta, Facebook and Instagram, and got my accounts taken down. It's one of the things that I've had to deal with. And fortunately, I now have a new account that's all open back up again, but I was never able to retrieve my old information. And I receive a fair amount of backlash in my comment section or during my lives that is not great. It doesn't make you feel, but I will say this, I have been the subject of bullying most of my life. I think most of the queer community can say that they have been the subject of some sort of bullying throughout their life. This is not unfamiliar to me. It's just presented in a different way. My response towards that type of feedback or pushback is to simply block and ignore. I'm not one of the creators who will dress down a bad actor in public and try to argue a point that I know won't be heard by the person that made the comment. So I have great moderators during my live streams that just block with impunity. We just don't allow, we build the community we want. Honestly, in my following, it is really about respect for each other and for ourselves. I end all of my live streams with be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I think those are two really important things. If we're kind to ourselves, if we practice self-love, we have less of a tendency to be awful to other people. And so it is really a tendency to drown out those awful voices with the positive and affirming voices of my community. And I do that in real life too.
Very positive attitude. It's also a big burden. I'm curious, are there things that you want to see from the platforms in terms of making, shifting the burden to them, or changes in their platform design? Or
I feel like that is a huge obstacle for all social media companies. Is like, where do you draw the line between monitoring and watching out for bullying and bad actors, and then limiting free speech? How do you navigate that? And I would not want to be the person that has to try to figure out where to draw those lines and how to make that happen in a technology-based atmosphere. It is truly something that needs to be addressed more and more. I feel like some of the platforms are getting better. I noticed, honestly, the false reports that I've had on TikTok have dwindled over the last year and a half. It used to be a real problem that bad actors would just use the reporting system on social media to get creators like me banned or reported. I feel like that's happening less.
Yeah. But what about you? Are you using social media? I mean, you're trying to build awareness, obviously, for your books, but how are you approaching social?
Very carefully now. I feel just a lot more guarded because I'm more of a public figure than I was before when I started, and so I don't include my family in posts because that makes me feel really weird and gross, and so that's something that I keep very private, and I use it to bring attention to certain issues. For instance, I just lost my job at DePaul, and I wanted to bring attention to the hypocrisy of the administration wanting to make this a Hispanic serving institution, and yet just deleting resources and people from students, and so that created like this big media hubbub. But as far as like, I don't want to do that all the time. That I find that very exhausting. It makes me feel very tense and anxious, and that's just not how I want to live. And so I limit my social media use for my own well-being, because I don't want to get depressed talking about depression on social media. Like it's just a weird cycle. And I'm very, very worried about what it's doing to teen girls in particular, and how devastating these apps are for their mental well-being. And so I'm very vigilant. I'm very skeptical. I'm worried about my children using it at some point, because it's real life, but it's not really real life. It's this weird space that I think we haven't quite defined yet. And so I think it's very, very useful, but it's also very, very dangerous. And at this point, I only have Instagram. I've deleted everything else just out of principle. And I feel better for it.
To talk a little bit more about the weight of this moment, Davie, your TikTok presence was inspired by, the pandemic. It was a thing that came out of the pandemic. And I think one of the big lessons from the pandemic for a lot of us was this obvious need for connection and community. I was one of those people. I was completely isolated for the better part of a year. I lived alone. I lost my last, living parent in 2020. But in the end, I developed this like newfound hunger to rediscover my roots, my heritage, my sense of belonging and community. So if there's a silver lining for folks, maybe that's one. But I'm also just struck that we haven't had this collective opportunity to grieve what we lost in COVID, much less all of these other issues that we're touching on in this conversation. And my question for both of you would be, first of all, how do you think that we can connect with communities or lean on communities to help us grieve? Do we need to grieve collectively? And also, how can we be showing up for people who might be experiencing grief and loneliness when it's hard to recognize? We're very dialed into what we're experiencing. Sometimes we miss what others are experiencing.
I do feel like we've had a chance at least to talk about some of those issues on social media and in real life. It comes up in conversations with people that I talk to all the time, the things that are different now. It's the things that feel like we're living in a completely different space than we were 3 years ago. But also I would say that through that, we have had some real conversations on social media that have taken our leadership kind of by surprise. They have been really worried about what we, the people, are actually talking about, the changes that we want to see. And we see a lot of that happening, and there's pushback to it as well. There's resistance from people who are uncomfortable with change, seeing the change that has come out of people across the world banding together and presenting a unified front against the things that we see as injustices in the world. And we do that more and more by talking to each other, by sharing ideas. And I think that is the benefit that we see coming out of social media.
Yeah, I think that social media has done incredible things for humanity in many different ways. And, revolutions have been started on social media. I find that really exciting. But then there's like the darker side of social media. And Davie was talking about, bad actors, trolls, and people who are extremely hateful who come out because they're able to be anonymous. And so it's like this constant like negotiation, I think, for me. And I think that for children, they don't have that capacity yet to negotiate, so they are like consumed by it at times. And so that I suppose that's what troubles me the most.
A few of our readers have asked questions about sort of they're looking for practical guidance on overcoming loneliness. And I wonder if in exploring possibilities, what the alternatives are to social media in terms of finding connection and community, maybe that you all have experienced. Obviously, there's potential in social media, but there are other avenues. Some of the questions that we've gotten include Emily, a 19th reader, who says she's curious about loneliness and life transitions when moving to a new city, as well as finding connection in a remote work environment. Christine is wondering how to overcome loneliness and feeling left out and feeling behind in life, like finding her purpose. I feel like writing has been one way that I've tried to hone in on finding purpose and voice. Mel is looking for practical advice on how to find communities and steps to take if you're looking to start a community. I'm curious if you both have, practical advice to give to folks who are hungry and still searching for ways to connect, whether it's on social media or in real life, in community spaces. Erika, what about you?
Yeah, I feel that when I'm among people in real life, I'm the most joyful. And so for me, I need to make that happen. And what I think some of the most loneliest times of my life have been when I didn't really connect with a lot of people. And so now that I'm older and I know what I need, I feel like, for instance, I've been interviewing women for a book that I'm writing, and it's like women who remind me of my mother and my aunts, and we have a really fun time talking. And that's something that's bringing me joy right now. So it's like trying to find people through a shared passion, perhaps, like maybe join a church if that's what you want, or take a class if you can do that. just start doing things that you love. And I feel like typically people emerge like in an organic way. I don't know if that's like the best method, but that's something that really works for me, to like just follow something that I really care about. And then you know, you'll find your community at some point. And I did that with writing. I have like a huge community of writers that I feel I can rely on. And so yeah, just do something you love and really go for it.
And also, it sounds like get out in the world that you live in.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Davie, what about you?
I would love to second what Erika said about, you know, making that choice to get out. I discovered after spending you know, a while on TikTok and building that community there, that I had really done very little with my local queer community at all. Like I had stayed cloistered, and it's fun to build community online, but when you turn off that phone, you're sitting in a room alone. You're by yourself again, and it really does need to be a choice to go out into your actual community in real life and connect with people there. I would say, if you're looking for ways to do that, volunteer. I was told by a mentor of mine years ago, when you are feeling sad about yourself and about the world, go out and volunteer. You will feel instantly better. So find ways to volunteer. Find a game group or a trivia group in your neighborhood. Go out and connect with real people in real life. Social media is great, but when you turn off that phone, you're alone in your room. So please, please do make the effort. We've forgotten kind of how to do that in the pandemic, but go out and touch grass and see real people. You may want to put on a mask depending on who you're around or how many people are there, but go do it.
Sort of on this note of in the practical advice arena, you know, part of mental health is learning how to care for ourselves fully, right? And understanding how our emotional and our mental well-being are tied to our bodily well-being and vice versa. And also just understanding, you know, how to process our emotions. And for many of us, you know, that may include the traumas that underlie some of those emotions. I would really love to hear a little bit more about your own sort of relationship with mental wellness, and if there are things that you have developed in terms of good habits for self-care. Like, what are your go-to things that you do? What are your rituals in terms of self-care? And are there tips that you have also for when people are experiencing that overwhelm? Davie, I was watching your TikToks the other day, and you talked about like this latest wave of news about the shootings in Nashville, like the looking for the helpers. I thought that was such a beautiful, hopeful tip. But like, what are talk to us a little bit more about your own sort of mental wellness journey and sort of your habits for self-care. Erika, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I think self-care in my community for women is very rarely encouraged. You're seen as selfish if you know, do things that are not for your family. And so that's something that I've had to break, and it's been very difficult. But I feel like I've achieved that, or maybe it's an ongoing thing. I don't know, but I realize, I mean, it's very simple, but if I'm happy, my daughter's happy. Like, she cannot be happy if I'm miserable. So I better do my best to take care of myself, because otherwise it's a disservice to her, you know? And so that's how I think now as a parent, that I have to be equipped to protect her. And that means like going on walks all the time when I need it. That means putting her in daycare because I can't take care of her all day because I have things to do. That means, you know, asking people for help. That means, which includes like my parents taking care of the baby, or, you know, meditation. Meditation has played a huge part in my life in the recent weeks, and reading to understand myself better. And one book that I keep thinking about that has changed me very, very deeply is called The Pain We Carry, and it's by Natalie Y. Gutierrez, and it's about PTSD in people of color, and how to cope and how to transcend, and where it all comes from. I mean, it's just like this really life-changing book that it's hard to summarize, but that has changed a lot for me.
Thank you. I'm going to look that up. Davie, what about you?
You know, I think I've said it before to a lot of people that my TikTok started out kind of as a gentle reminder to myself to do certain things. So if you ever see my TikToks on there saying, remember to look for the helpers, or remember to drink your water, or do this or do that, it's really pointed, the lens is pointed at me. It's like, you need to remember to do those things. Just remembering to do simple things in your life can be such amazing self-care. Drinking enough water during the day, just remembering to feed yourself and not go without food. Getting in the shower for a lot of people is just the hardest thing to do in their life, especially now that so many are living and working at home. It's just like those little self-care moments are so, so important. I joke with a lot of my followers in the queer community, you know, hydrate or die straight. You know, you gotta get your water in. You're just a big walking bag of water. So those are the self-care things. Now, of course, you know, people ask me all the time, what do I do when I'm feeling anxious or depressed? And honestly, for each person, it's a little bit different. I love to go out and get in my car and sing at the top of my voice. It gets the oxygen flowing. It makes your brain look for lyrics in its little filing cabinet. It does a lot of things to activate your body and your mind. For me, that work. Now, that may not work for somebody else. Somebody else is like, I'm not getting in my car and singing. I don't care if I'm by myself. That's embarrassing. But do what you can. You know, I tell people, your journey of self-care is going to be yours. If you can't get out and go for a walk, get the windows open and at least, you know, get some sunshine in your space. If you can't afford to go for therapy sessions, at least sit down and write out your feelings for a while. Get those on paper so you can see them. It varies for every single person, but as long as we're remembering ourselves, it's that whole, you know, putting on your oxygen mask before helping somebody else. We're going to be useless to other people unless we take care of ourselves. And we are here to help take care of other people.
I need more solo car karaoke in my life, I think.
I think so, yes.
We're just about out of time. Before we go, how can people find your work online? Erika, where can people find more about your books and your writing?
ErikaLSanchez.com, and I'm also on Instagram under the same handle.
Terrific. Davie, how can people find you on TikTok?
I am Dave Felton on TikTok and on YouTube, and now my new Instagram and Facebook, which have no content because I just put them up yesterday, is Davie TikTok, Davie TikTok.
Good. That is wonderful. Thank you both for being so generous with your time and your wisdom today. A final note before we close, if you or someone that you know is in crisis, dial 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also check out the National Alliance on Mental Illness at NAMI.org or the Human Rights Campaign at HRC.org for more mental health resources. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the 19th Jennifer Gerson to continue this conversation on loneliness.